Hello, friends. This all happened a long time ago, so please bear with me, as this is a completely true story that I verified with my family over the holidays, although it's something we don't like to forget. I'm 19 now and in college, but I originally grew up in a small town in New England. The area itself is basically in the middle of a few game refugees and is surrounded by farms, fields, forests, and mountains as far as the eye can see. It's beautiful in the fall, but can be annoyingly creepy at night. This all may seem irrelevant, but what you need to understand is that crime wasn't something that normally happened at all. There was the occasional car robbery, but today would usually just turn themselves in when they figured out that someone knew another person whose car had been robbed. And they would get into more trouble with their mother than the authorities if they didn't turn themselves in. It was that kind of town. Everyone, for the most part, felt generally safe there. My mom was always overly cautious, though she would always walk my brother and sister and myself down to the end of the street while we waited for the bus to pick us up for school. We didn't mind too much, as we've always lived on a street that literally had no other kids. It was, and still is, mainly just older people. It was like having about 9 extra grandparents who would often give us sweets and other goodies. That being said, though we didn't really play with any other kids on the regular, we normally just read books and entertained ourselves, so you can understand that we liked having our mother to talk to while we waited for the bus. And if I got the year right, my brother was about 9 at the time, my sister 5, and myself 7, so we were pretty young, but not incredibly young. Not to sound completely narcissistic, but we basically looked like the perfect set of children. My brother and I looked like twins, all smiled and both of our 2 front teeth were missing. And my sister was the perfect picture of rosy cheeks and cherry sundresses. She would actually be stopped occasionally while we are on vacation to take pictures with Japanese oars who thought she was a little model. One day on our way out to the bus, we opened the side door of our house and saw a small pile of pennies doormat. We were thrilled as we thought that it was a leprechaun that it came back to give us more coins. A family friend of ours had shared one of their family traditions with us just a week prior. If you leave a potato on your doorstep on the eve of St. Patrick's Day, then a leprechaun will leave you a stack of coins in exchange for his favorite meal. The whole idea of getting money, even a measly 27 cents, was exciting for us, and we were all happy to take the coins. Our mom didn't see a problem with it, and she assumed that it was our dad that left the coins there before he left for work early that morning. At the time, no one really suspected anything odd. Naturally, though, we all know that's total BS. For the next couple of weeks, the pile kept showing up on our doorstep and slowly began to trail down to the driveway, stopping at the end for a few days before trailing down the street to where our bus usually stops every morning. At this point, my parents began to freak out, and rightfully so, after discovering that my dad had and left the pile of coins. They began to ask the Swede out early neighbors whether or not they had left the coins. Every single one said no. We stopped taking the coins after that. The pile of coins at the end of the street grew and grew in size over the next few weeks. This had been going on for a month or so. At this point, the coins were always there, and they were clearly meant for us, but no one was in sight. You're probably wondering why my parents didn't call the police at this point. Well, they didn't want to cause them any trouble. My mother's words, not my own. One day, however, they did end up having to call. We were all standing at the end of the road beside the ominous pile of coins when a gray sedan pulled up from behind the tree line and parked across the road from our street. We would have thought that this was normal, as many people parked there to take hikes, but the car didn't have any plates. The only way this vehicle could have been more nondescript would have been if it were painted camouflage. What the clincher for us was the red scarf we saw tied on the car side mirror. It was the very same one that we had tied onto our mailbox to let the bus driver know if we were sick and wouldn't be coming to school that day. It had been stolen months ago. Not too long after that, an investigation took place, but nothing really came of it. But once the police began monitoring the house, the coins stopped coming, and the car never came back. If my mother wasn't as careful with us as she was, we would have been kidnapped faster than you can blink. After talking about it some more, we came to the conclusion that he was probably after my baby sister, the one with the wide eyes and perfect apple plum cheeks. She's 16 years old now and can't remember any of this, but it's honestly terrifying to think about how she, my little sister, could have been gone forever. The part that scares me the most about this is that this guy isn't your usual kidnapper. He was patient. He waited for months and months to try and get his hands on us. He watched our house and our family for months trying to find an opportunity. He watched us walk to the end of the street every morning for the bus. He knew when we were sick. He saw us leave the potato out on our doorstep for the leprechaun, and he knew how to reel us in. This guy knew everything, and we'll never know how. Soon after, our dad thought it would be safer to have us trained in self-defense. And although it may sound like I'm making this up, my siblings and I now have training and know how to defend ourselves. Basically, my tiny little sister could throw a grown man over her shoulder at the age of 11, if you could believe it. I don't really want to know where this douchebag is, but don't let any kids fall for the coin trick like we almost did. So, creepy leprechaun impersonator, if you're still out there somewhere, I hope me and my siblings never encounter you again. And if we do, expect to get dropped. It was a cool spring evening, and I was a little more than halfway through a road trip. For a bit of context, I'm a 23-year-old man. I was starting my career as an aspiring actor and model. at the time, and things were starting to pick up with my job. I was contracted by a well-known agency in Los Angeles, California, and they said they were willing to do a long-term contract with me, and essentially were ready to start to work. Obviously, I was thrilled, and while this was a dream come true, there was one issue. I lived in New York, and being a 23-year-old working an almost minimum wage job, I really couldn't afford to just hop on a flight to go over to LA. So, when I got the news, I did the math, and I realized it would actually be a lot cheaper to just drive from New York to California. Now, obviously, if I had the money, I would obviously choose to fly 6 hours over driving 40. Now, obviously, if I had the money, I would obviously choose flying 6 hours over driving 40 hours in my dad's old Ford. But hey, money doesn't grow on trees, and I wasn't going to reject this opportunity. So there I was, about 24 hours into the trip. I had taken a rest somewhere in Kentucky, but was still quite tired. Sleeping in your car is never fun, especially after hours and hours of driving in it. A couple more hours went by and I caught myself in a rural part of West Texas. At this point, I noticed that my car was running a bit low on gas, and most importantly, the low air pressure light was on. My parents have had this car since I was a kid, so obviously I wasn't going to take the risk of just driving with the light on. After all, I wouldn't want to get stuck somewhere on the rural highway. According to the Maps app on my phone, the nearest gas station with an air pump was a local 7-Eleven about 10 minutes off of my trip's path. It was late at night, 1 a.m. to be specific, but thankfully 7-Elevens are open 24/7. As much as the detour annoyed me, I really didn't have much of a choice. I was honestly lucky that there was even anything open and nearby. I drove up to the 7-Eleven and pulled my car into the nearest pump. I popped open my gas cap and started filling my car. And after a few minutes, sure enough, it was full. But then came the next and arguably most important step, fixing that tire pressure light. While I was out of my car, I tried to look around. While I was out of my car, I tried to look around and look at which tire was tripping off the sensor. But as I was looking around, I noticed a shadow from inside the store. It moved somewhat awkwardly. It seemed like one of the store workers was peering out the window, and they backed away instantly when they saw me look over. Well, that's weird, I thought. Despite the clerk's social anxiety, I needed to get to my destination, and I didn't want to spend any more time here than I had to. So I went up to the air pump, and sadly enough, the air pump wasn't self-serve. This meant I had to go inside and talk to that nervous employee for help. Damn it. I walked in the door and looked around. But I didn't see any employees whatsoever. The store was barren, almost like it was up and running and suddenly abandoned. All of the lights were on and the equipment was functioning. The hum of the refrigerators and AC ironically made the silence even creepier. I figured that employee from before was somewhere in the back on his break, so I tried to get his attention. Hello, excuse me. There was a long and awkward pause, followed by a set of steps coming from the back. Hello, is anyone there? I asked once again. Another long and awkward pause. Followed. I asked once again. Another long and awkward pause followed. And then eerie sounds of manic laughter. Excuse me, is this some kind of joke? I asked, irritated from the antics. What was going on and why was this employee acting like a kid? Come on over, don't be shy, the man said, trying to lure me over to the back. Don't get me wrong, I was beyond creeped out. And confused at this point, but I just wanted to hit the damn power switch on the pump. To the pump. I reluctantly walked over to the back to check what was happening. I figured if I just played into this guy's weird game, he'd just listen to me. Or leave me alone. So naturally, I reluctantly walked over to the back. There was nothing behind the counter, but there seemed to be a constant giggling from a door that said employees only. My back was tense, and pretty much every urge in my body told me not to open the door. But mistakenly, I did. When I opened the door, I saw something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. In the room there was a 7-Eleven employee, still in his vest and uniform, mutilated on the ground. In the room there was a 7-Eleven employee, still in his vest and uniform, mutilated on the ground. Behind the employee was a man giggling from before, still chuckling. He was barefoot, sickly looking, and had tattered, bloody clothing. He then looked at me with manic eyes and started laughing even harder. My feet were frozen, almost like they were cemented into the ground. But then the man's laughter turned into full-on screaming and he started crawling towards me. I quickly slammed the door and darted towards my car. But as I was running, I felt the urge to tug. I felt something tug my ankle and trip me. But as I was running, I felt something tug my ankle and trip me from behind. "No, don't leave so early," the man said, trying to drag me back. I kicked the man in the face as hard as I could and I ran out. I quickly got into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine as soon as I could. As soon as I pulled out of the spot, the crazy man jumped on my hood and started screaming at me to stop the car. As soon as I pulled out of the spot, the crazy man jumped on my hood and started screaming at me to stop the car. I didn't know what else to do, so I just floored it. And that seemed to throw the man off. I kept driving and never looked back, sweating and panting the whole time. Eventually the tire that was low on air got me, and I had to pull over into another town. I immediately called the local law enforcement and told them everything. That happened. When they showed up to the scene, they did not find a single thing. Aside from the dead 7-Eleven worker. When they showed up to the scene, they did not find a single thing aside from the dead 7-Eleven worker and a raided store with broken glass and flipped over shelves. The police couldn't find anything that could lead them to the man. The police could obviously identify the dead employee, but had no idea who the laughing man was. The police could obviously identify the dead employee, but had no idea who the laughing man was or where he could be. The man was a ghost. I've never told anyone this story, at least not until now, and that's probably for good reasons. I currently live in LA, and while I'm still pursuing my career in entertainment, I still sometimes think about where that man could be. Hello again. It was a normal Saturday like any other. While most people were having fun or enjoying their weekend, I was cooped up behind a register. I worked at 7-Eleven, and let's just say, when you're in my financial situation, you don't really get a huge choice of what you can do over the weekends. And while I could make a whole video on how much I hated mopping floors, while my richer friends were out having fun, I wanted to get something off my chest. Something more serious, more sinister. I was working the prime time shift between 12 and 8. During this time of the year, this is usually when the crowds of people get the largest. The area I live in is quite affluent. I mentioned this before, but my neighbors and my closest friends are quite rich. This led to a more interesting demographic with my customers. Wealthier people don't tend to shop at gas station convenience stores unless they have to. Most of them end up buying from premium grocery stores down the road. Unless it was some sort of necessity or emergency, no one really ever went inside. And even if they did, it was always something along the lines of a water bottle or some food, or a snack for the road. The result of this was people mostly just serving themselves at the pump, and me just sitting and doing nothing. As boring as this was, I honestly enjoyed just sitting and chilling out while people served themselves. This gave me the opportunity to do some schoolwork or listen to music. On weekends during this time of year, however, this dynamic changed. On weekends, there were junior soccer tournaments in local regions. These kids' league soccer competitions meant that travelers would either go into or through our town. This meant that I would have to work a little harder. People were getting more than just water. It would always be something like towels or hand sanitizers, or the occasional coffee for the tired chaperone. Being fully aware it was soccer season, I really wasn't surprised at all when there were various large SUVs or minivans constantly pulling into the station. After all, youth soccer is very, very popular in the United States. But bear in mind, this was only during the rush hours. The flurry of cars would only come in right before the game started and right after they ended. Nothing really in between. So when a minivan with a chaperone sticker on the side pulled in at around 3 p.m., I was obviously confused. These games usually end at around 5 p.m. That means the rush hour starts at around 5:30 when everyone's leaving. But I said hell with it. Minivans are among the most popular vehicles in the US. Would it really be that uncommon for someone to just own one? And besides, a lot of things could have happened. Maybe a kid got injured and they had to leave early. Maybe they were getting gas now to avoid the rush hour later. Again, smart choice. So I just resumed scrolling on my phone. But after several minutes, the van was still there. This is obviously not a normal amount of time for a vehicle to stop. But after a few long, awkward minutes went by, the driver stepped out. The driver was a scruffy, middle-aged man. He had a somewhat long beard but seemed overall unkempt. He then tried to fill up the car with gas. He seemed to struggle for a few minutes, trying to get the pump to work. The pump seemed to be having problems with the credit card reader. This wasn't all too uncommon. Our transaction processing system likes to reject cards that it thinks are fraudulent. But as of late, it's been acting up and rejecting normal cards. So the man walked into the store and I greeted him like I usually do. "Welcome in, sir," I told the man. The man sort of ignored what I said and walked up to the counter. As intimidating as this was, I've had my fair share of angry customers. It's something I'd been through. "The damn pump ain't taking my card." "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Our systems are kind of weird. Would you like to pay with cash instead?" "Fine, just take this. I need to go use the bathroom." The man left me with a wad of $10 bills and then went to use the bathroom. Clearly, the guy was having a bad day. I better get the pump rolling quick. So I opened up the terminal and I tried to get things running. However, this wasn't working either. Normally, customers can walk in and prepay a certain amount of cash at a certain pump. But it looked like the terminal wasn't responding itself. Something was genuinely wrong with this pump. The man was still in the bathroom and I really wasn't in the mood to go and tell him that he had to move his vehicle. He was already cranky that his card got rejected. I didn't want to start another conflict with him. The next most logical option was to go to the pump itself and try to manually override it. And that's exactly what I did. My manager taught me a few months ago how to put the pumps in admin mode. This would allow us to see if there's something physically wrong with the pump or it's just deciding not to work. But unfortunately, there was something seriously wrong with this pump, something which I wouldn't be able to fix. This wasn't news I was expecting to tell the man, but I knew I had to close this pump and eventually let him know that he'd have to move his car. But as I turned around to go inside, I heard a loud thud. I turned around and I saw nothing. At first, I thought it was something from my music. Keep in mind, I have one AirPod in this whole time. But that's when I heard another knock from the van. This couldn't be my music. The knocks were random, they had no beat or rhythm, and they clearly weren't any instrument I'd heard of. I tried to peep in the back windows to see what was happening in there. But the back windows were tinted very, very dark. I really couldn't see in there. I then took out my AirPod to get a better understanding of what was happening, and heard another thud. This was getting weird. I had to understand what was going on in that damn van. I took out my phone and I turned on my flashlight, and I tried to use the flashlight to better see through the tinted windows. Let's just say it worked, and what I saw horrified me. In the back of the car was a group of children. All of them were tied down with their mouths taped closed. All of them looked terrified. The knocking sound was coming from one of the kids kicking the door as a sign for help. My heart sank. I didn't even know what to do. For that second, I just stood there, frozen in fear and shock. In that paralyzed moment of fear, that's when it all started to hit me. The man's anger and impatience, his fraudulent card not going through, the way he looked at me in the car as he was going to the bathroom. I knew exactly what was happening at this moment. After my brain cleared up, I realized I had to stop standing there and quickly go do something. As I turned around quickly to try and run for help, I bumped right into someone. It was the man. "You know it's not polite to snoop around other people's stuff, kid," the man told me with rage and anger under his breath. At this point, both of us knew exactly what was happening, and for some reason, I thought I could talk my way out of this. Well, you see, But as I was trying to make up some sort of excuse, the man lunged at me. With all of the luck in the world, I managed to dodge him. Keep in mind that I'm a rather skinny young man. Thankfully, I had the agility advantage on my side, and I could somehow outmaneuver him. As the man was getting back on his feet, I managed to grab one of the windshield cleaning wands from the bucket nearby. Without even thinking, I managed to smack him across the face with it as hard as I could, and this seemed to knock him out cold. I then quickly smashed open the car windows using the same rod to let the kids out. All of the kids and I ran inside the store. We locked the doors and called the cops. The man was gaining consciousness by the time the cops came, but was handcuffed soon after. I told the police everything and they instantly had a case. The man was part of a larger kidnapping ring in my state. Of late, their newest strategy was to pretend to be chaperones and kidnap kids from sports games. A lot of these sports teams have transportation services, which help bring kids in and out, and these people managed to find a way to pretend to be them. The kids were all thankfully okay, and they were instantly reunited with their parents. But obviously, this left a bad stain on our community. A lot of parents stopped using carpools or paid transportation to bring their kids in and out of games. Some even de-enrolled their children permanently. I couldn't help but imagine what could have happened to these kids if that pump hadn't failed. If the terminal just accepted his money and he drove off. Needless to say, I quit 7-Eleven right after that. I was being paid to use a cash register, not deal with kidnappers. My son Josh is a great kid. He's always been the quirky and curious type, taking up hard watches, toys, and the like, just to see if he can put them back together again. His curiosity, however, took a dark turn when his mother died. Josh became a different kid after that. He suddenly became obsessed with the notion of death and what it means. Thus, it came as no surprise when I found out what he decided to do for his science fair project. "I'm testing the line between life and death, Dad," he had said matter-of-factly as he sat eating his German-French toast. What do you mean, buddy? What's this?" Josh seized my iPhone, which had been resting on the table, and flung it into the kitchen sink before I could stop him. Josh turned the water on and seized the can opener, whacking my phone repeatedly. The screen cracked and the phone itself died. I wanted to yell, but I knew that wasn't the right thing to do. I had to discipline him some other way. "Josh, why would you do that? Do you know how much that thing cost for me to get that fixed?" "Don't worry, Dad. You won't have to pay for anything." He picked up the phone out of the sink and ran upstairs to his room. I started after him, shaking my head. I seized about my son's troubling spontaneous behavior all day at work. When I got home, however, I found my iPhone screen completely fixed and all. I picked it up, studying it, and found that it was working as if nothing had happened at all. "Buddy." Josh came running down the stairs, goggles over his eyes, with a PlayStation controller in his hand. "Who did you get to fix this, and when did he get the money to pay for it?" Josh tilted his head. "What do you mean? I did it myself." "That was my first experiment for my project, Dad. I move on to phase 2 and document everything tomorrow." I watched confused as he ran back up the stairs. I had no idea what he was up to, but I was just happy I didn't have to pay an arm and a leg to get my phone fixed, or to get a new one. Josh's little experiment seemed harmless. Then came phase 2. I walked into the kitchen the next morning prepared to make breakfast and coffee, and stopped to my tracks. Josh was standing in front of the counter, a pigeon strapped down on the cutting board in front of him, and I immediately had a bad feeling about this. "Josh, buddy, what in the world are you doing?" Josh held up a large pair of scissors. "It's phase 2, now watch this." I lunged towards the counter, but it was too late. In one swift move, Josh had decapitated the helpless bird. There was a sickening clipping sound, and then the blood was leaking all over the cutting board and my kitchen counter. This time, I lost it. "Josh, what the hell is the matter with you? Why did you do that?" Josh looked frightened by my reaction. He didn't expect me to lose my mind after watching him kill an innocent animal. Dad, I already told you, it's phase 2. I dropped him off at school and called a psychiatrist. Maybe his mother's death was hitting him harder than he had let on. I have heard stories about serial killers killing live animals when they were children, and I'll be damned if my son turned into a killer. I scheduled an appointment for the next day. When I got home, I found Josh sitting on the couch in the living room, writing in his journal. His poster board from his project was leaning against the wall by the TV. I couldn't help but notice there was bird crap next to the TV as well. Josh, what as a pigeon swooped past my head and landed on the couch cooing? Softly, I jumped it in, hoping to grab it before Josh could. But he made no moves. The pigeon shot back off into the air out of my reach. Why is there another bird in here? I swear, It's not another bird, Dad. It's the same one from earlier today. Josh and I stared at each other for a few seconds. I was sizing him up while simultaneously wondering what the hell had suddenly gone wrong. That can't be, Josh. You cut that bird's head off, remember? Yeah, I put it back and I brought him back. This project is going really, really well, Dad. I'll beat semi-pigeons for sure this year. I was entirely positive that Josh had captured another bird and was losing his mind. But when I checked the garbage can, the bag that I placed the decapitated bird in was gone. This had gone past the point of too far. Josh had gotten rid of the corpse. It was attempting to convince me that he had somehow raised it from the dead. This was meticulous and premeditated. I really did worry about my son, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I slept with my door locked that night. Well, until about 2 in the morning. That is when I was woken by the last thing you want to hear at 2 o'clock in the morning. Someone beating non-stop on your front door. Well, beating may be a harsh word. Whoever was knocking on the door was doing it forcefully, but it was not much strength behind the knocks. Still, it scared the hell out of me, but not nearly as much as the sight of Josh standing in the living room, white as a sheet, staring at the door. Josh, what are you doing out of bed? Josh turned to me, his eyes wide in terror. What? What's the matter, pal? Go back upstairs, I'll figure out who this is. Don't open the door, Dad. I messed up. The slow knocking continued behind. Messed up how? Josh stared at me in the eyes. I wanted to do something really good for phase 3, so I brought Mom back. Knock, 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 knock. Joshua, your mother has been dead for almost 2 years. This isn't funny. I made a move for the door, but Josh jumped in front of me, grabbing my hand. Don't open it, Dad, don't open it. He and I are still sitting in the house. The knocking has stopped, but now there is a coring at the window. I keep asking my son if he can undo this mishap, but he say he's only one thing. I'm going to beat Cindy Pickens for sure this year. It was a somewhat nippy autumn night, and I was about halfway into my shift. I was a young man and I took up any job that I really could at the time. In this case, it was the late shift at 7-Eleven. In the United States, 7-Elevens are open 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. This meant that someone had to take up that horrid night shift, and that person was me. As much as the job messed up my sleep schedule, it did help me do my coursework during the day, and it did pay a bit better than the normal shifts. I've been told that working at a convenience store is among the most dangerous jobs in the States, and this claim was honestly understandable. Although my city is decently safe, the people who go to 7-Elevens late at night are a lot different than your normal shopper. From what I saw, it was either crazy crackheads, higher than a kite, or a bunch of drunken teenagers falling all over the place trying to make another booze run. This was extremely annoying. My coworker Colin and I were largely responsible for kicking these people out, and while it was an inconvenience, it never got truly out of hand or unsafe. This all changed one Thursday night, however. My coworker Colin had some sort of family emergency to take care of, and this resulted in him having to skip a few shifts. This meant that I was in charge of handling the dreaded 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift completely alone. This truly annoyed me. Colin was a really chill guy. His conversations made the hours go by much faster, and without him, I'd just be alone in some dirty store in the middle of the night. Regardless, I received my orders from my manager, and I had to do what I had to do. I arrived at my shift around 5 minutes late, as usual, and things were initially going by completely normal. The people that walked in consisted of the usual late-night shoppers and people in their pajamas stopping for gas last minute. It seemed like a completely normal weekday night at first, but then a little past the midnight hour, things got really strange. It was 12:15 at night, and I was sitting on my small chair next to the counter. I had just plugged my phone into the charger as it was running low on battery from using it all night, and that's when I noticed a car pull up to one of the pumps. It was a large black SUV. The windows in the back were either completely shattered or lazily replaced with cardboard and duct tape. A tall, rather large-built man stepped out in a trench coat and boots. He turned over to the front door of the store and started to calmly approach it. I just kept glancing at my phone. However, most people just walk in quickly to get something and then leave. There's no need for formalities at this hour. "You call this customer service?" the man said in a low, husky voice. It took me a second or two to process that. The people who come in here, especially at this time, aren't exactly expecting award-winning service. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Is there anything I can get for you?" The man just laughed. "Oh, kid, there's nothing you can get for me, but there is something you can do." At first, I thought the man was going to ask for some weird sexual favor. Funnily enough, I'd been asked this before while I was on the job. "You see, I'm not a young man like you. My joints don't function like they used to. And you see my car over there? Well, it could use a wash and a fill." The man's attitude and overall demeanor was really weird, and the way the guy was talking was unsettling. I mean, if the guy could walk all the way over here just fine, why couldn't he fill his own gas or wash his own windshield? However, state law says I have to assist any handicapped or impaired customers if they request it. There was no handicap sticker on this man's car, or any sign that he was disabled in any way. But hey, if they request it, I have to help them. "All right, sir, give me a moment," I replied as I placed my phone to the side. I then turned on the pump from my control panel and started heading towards the car. Look at those youthful muscles work. I'd love to see it. For whatever reason, I ignored the man's creepiness and continued heading towards the car. The sooner I cleaned his windshield and filled his tank, the sooner he'd be out of here. At least, that's what I'd hoped. As I stepped out of the building, the man seemed to remain in the store. He seemed to be browsing up and down the shelves, or something. Whatever. I got to the vehicle and sure enough, the gas cap was wide open and ready for me. As I filled the van with gas, I couldn't help but think about what the man said. He seemed honestly fine, and was totally capable of putting a nozzle in a gas tank. It made me wonder why I was even out there in the first place. But hell, if I could just get this weirdo out of here, I could get back inside to messing around on my phone. After about a minute or two, the tank was full, and it was time for me to wash the man's windshield. As I stepped out towards the back door of the van, however, I heard the back door shut. As weird as this was, keep in mind the car was really beaten down and old. It's kind of expected for a car like that to make weird noises, especially on a windy night like this one. I quickly pulled out the sponge and squeegee and started to get to work. But as I was cleaning the glass, that's when I felt the discomfort, the odd sensation of being watched or stalked. As I turned around, I felt a hand go over my eyes, and soon my mouth. I barely had any time to comprehend what was even happening. One second I was cleaning the glass, and the next I was being headlocked. I then heard a familiar sound of the front door to the store opening, and heavy footsteps coming my way. Too many thoughts were racing through my head at this moment. But somehow, somewhere, I mustered everything I had and flung myself back as hard as I could. The person holding me down crashed into the gas pump and shrieked in pain. "Damn it, Carl," the tall man said. I rolled back onto my feet and sprinted as hard as I could, my breath getting heavier and heavier every large stride I made. I managed to run across into a neighborhood and dive into the bushes, slowly peeping my head out to see if they were still following me in the van. After the longest 10 or so minutes of my life, my adrenaline died down, and I finally got the courage to step out of the bush. Just as I was about to call my manager and then the cops, it hit me. My phone was still in the store charging. Thankfully, however, a close friend of mine lived in the neighborhood I ran away towards. I knocked on his door and told him everything. Naturally, we called the police. When we went back to the station after the police told us they'd arrived, my manager was already there. Somehow, my manager and the police were as or more surprised than I was. things like this rarely happen in my city. We always considered it a safe place. The police immediately looked through the CCTV footage as my manager suggested, and what we saw shocked us even more. When I had stepped out to wash and fill the van, the man jumped over the counter and tried to find and disable the security cameras and their footage. He couldn't manage to do this, so he just stepped outside and decided that deleting the footage wasn't worth his time. We managed to capture the man's faces on the video right after I made my escape. We then submitted the footage to the higher-level police to see what was happening. It turns out that the men were known as human traffickers and were on the run from previous kidnappings. The license plate on the van seemed to be fraudulent or stolen, as the numbers only matched a completely different vehicle on the other side of the state. The investigators believed that the man stopped by my city on the way somewhere else. As I figured, it was a safer area and people wouldn't expect them to be there. I quit my job at 7-Eleven immediately after that. The event scared me every time. Every time I stepped into another gas station, I would always get reminded of how I almost got kidnapped. Needless to say, I would never pick up a job like that again.